Good morning, 7th grade. It is Tuesday, April 7th. Now, before we begin today's lesson on page 353, just tongue-tied, 23.2, the beginning of World War II, in your packet you should have quiz 35, which is over section 23.1, between the wars. I'd like you to take that quiz. Yes, you can use your book to look for answers. Just a little bit of a review for you. Nothing too bad. But once you get done with that, pause the video if you need to take the quiz first, or you can do it afterwards. But we're on page 353 today, the beginning of World War II. We're going to look at Hitler and the Third Reich first. The depression from the previous lesson brought perhaps the greatest economic hardship to Germany, which had already been suffering from a depression of its own thanks to the punishments of World War I. Remember, the Peace of Paris, the Treaty of Paris, basically blamed all of World War I on Germany, though they didn't start the war. Therefore, they had a ton of debt, their economy was already in the tank, their people were suffering, and then this depression makes it even worse. Desperate for any kind of economic recovery, and fearing that Russia would take them over, the German people were easily swayed by the promises of prosperity and protection coming from Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler did not start his campaign as an evil man at the beginning. He had to convince the people that he was here to help. He told the Germans, who began to even despise their own race, that do not hate yourself because you're German. We are a great people. We can become great again. Hitler had already come to power as a chancellor of Germany by 1933. At first, he was the head of a coalition or combination of political parties in the government. His Nazi party did not hold a majority in the Reichstag, which is basically their version of a parliament or legislative branch. In March 1933, just before a new election, the Nazis burned the Reichstag building and blamed it on the communists. This, of course, discredited the Communist Party and gave the Nazis a majority of the election. Next, the Nazi majority voted to give Hitler power to make laws by his own decree. In 1934, Hitler assumed the total power as the Führer, or leader of Germany. Hitler called his new government the Third Reich, or Third Empire, claiming the First Reich had been organized by Otto the Great in 962, and the Second Reich had been organized by Otto von Bismarck in 1871. In 1938, the top German military leaders were defamed and forced to resign. And as a result, Hitler took direct control of not only the legislative power, but the army itself. Hitler's rise to absolute power was attained with the consent of the majority of the German people. The German people loved Hitler and his words. He was a very charismatic speaker. Of course, if you were to listen to his speeches today, you would need one where it was translated because obviously he spoke in German. His moving speeches convinced the masses that he understood and sympathized with their economic and social needs. He was the man to deliver Germany from its economic and political woes. Unemployed men became faithful and enthusiastic stormtroopers, not the ones from Star Wars, members of the Nazi militia, and many young people joined the Hitler Youth. Hitler provided the Germans with jobs and a sense of patriotism. Almost before the world realized what was happening, Hitler had become the leader of a newly optimistic, enthusiastic, and thoroughly dedicated German people who would go to war at his command. The professed goal of Nazis was to get people back to work and get the economy moving again. Hitler did much to rebuild the German economy, largely by rebuilding the German military machine. Hitler began to build tanks and weaponry, at first very slowly because, remember, Germany was not allowed to have a large army, so he kind of tested the waters. He'd build a few tanks, wait to see if any European countries would, call on him for, hey, you're breaking these laws. And when no one did, because remember, everybody was suffering financially, no one wanted a war at this point. Hitler began just to churn out more tanks then. But foremost in Hitler's mind was always Germany's expansion. Hitler wanted an empire. He called it the Third Reich, which meant the Third Empire. Therefore, he wanted Germany to grow. One popular motto of his was, "Today, Germany, tomorrow, the world." Most notorious of Hitler's schemes, though, was his attempted annihilation of the Jewish race. Hitler's personal intense hatred of Jews made them the logical object of Nazi fury. While Hitler claimed that the Germans were the noblest race, he asserted that the Jews were the lowest and most despicable. In fact, he even accused the Jewish people of being responsible not only for World War I, but for the global depression. By 1933, German Jews were being severely persecuted. At first, shops were simply boycotted and Jews were removed from their political positions. But by the time World War II had broken out, many Jews had left the country, but those that didn't had begun to be rounded up and sent to concentration camps. And we truly did not know what Hitler was doing with the Jews until after World War II. Remember, we didn't have undercover reporters, no Fox News, nothing like that, to be in the war zone. It wasn't until after World War II that the true terror of what came to light, of what he did to the Jews and Gypsies, that we know as the Holocaust occurred. And guys, it is just a heart-wrenching thing to see are the documentaries and the photographs of these people. Some people just nothing but skin and bones. Hitler's hatred of Judaism was matched by his hatred of Christianity. He once quoted, "One is either a German or a Christian. You cannot be both," he exclaimed. By the mid-1930s, Europe was in turmoil as depression stirred, unrest, and unscrupulous politicians took advantage of the situation. Benito Mussolini had already come to power in Italy, and in October 1935, Mussolini invades Ethiopia. The brave emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, appealed to the League of Nations. Remember, the League was supposed to help countries, but the League did nothing. And by May 1936, Italy had conquered Ethiopia. But no sooner had Hitler come to power in 1933 than he withdrew Germany from the League of Nations, making the League basically worthless. He also ended Germany's World War I reparation payments, renounced the Treaty of Versailles, and, against the treaty's provisions, began rearming Germany. But like I said, the other countries were equally in poverty, so no one wanted to oppose. But in March 1936, he marched his troops into the Rhineland, Germany's western territory, which according to the treaty was to remain disarmed for the safety of all Europe. In the same year, Mussolini and Hitler formally joined forces by organizing the Rome-Berlin Axis. Germany and Italy would soon be known as the Axis powers. Also in 1936, a long period of political unrest in Spain broke into the Spanish Civil War. Mussolini and Hitler, both eager to see a fascist state on the doorsteps of France, gave aid to the revolutionary forces led by General Francisco Franco, who committed heinous acts against his own people, bombing citizens simply because they opposed him. He did save Spain from communism, though, by establishing his own dictatorship, which was equally as cruel, and he was president or dictator of Spain until 1975. When Germany rearmed the Rhineland in 1936, Hitler declared, "We have no territorial demands to make in Europe. I'm not going to take over the rest of you guys, I'm just simply rearming my country." But of course, in March 1938, Hitler's own words betrayed him, as German troops marched into neighboring Austria, and independent Austria quickly and quietly ceased to exist. Next, Hitler turned his attention to the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia bordering on Germany. Hitler told the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who was the leading voice in Europe for peace and consolation, that he just simply wanted the Sudetenland back because it had originally belonged to Germany anyway. "I just want what was originally ours back," he would say. And of course, Neville Chamberlain, who did not want war, agreed. But here's the funny thing. All of these European leaders are deciding the fate of Czechoslovakia. Guess who didn't get any representation in the meeting? Czechoslovakia. So of course, imagine their surprise when Hitler rolls up and is like, "This chunk of your country is now mine." Prime Minister Chamberlain returned to England to proclaim that this Munich conference had obtained peace in our time. Oh, how he wished he could take those words back. Most of Europe seemed satisfied with this assurance of peace, even though it was at the expense of little Czechoslovakia. The leading nations of Europe were content to sacrifice part of this tiny country to save themselves from Hitler's wrath. But at least one Englishman saw the folly of appeasing Hitler, and that was Winston Churchill, who issued this solemn warning. "And do not suppose that this is the end. No, this is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup, which will be proffered to us year by year, unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor, we arise again and take our stand for freedom as in the olden time." Winston Churchill saw Hitler for what he was and who he was. He knew that this was not the end, and how right Winston Churchill was. In March 1939, only 6 months after Hitler was given a tiny sliver of Czechoslovakia, Hitler takes the rest. Hitler's next target was Poland, but he feared incurring the wrath of Joseph Stalin. Nazis and communists hated each other, and so he was afraid that Joseph Stalin might attack them. So he decides to sign an agreement, August 1939, called the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which says, hey man, as long as I don't kill you or invade you right now, you're not going to invade me. Of course, both of them were plotting the assassination of the other while signing this treaty, and gave Hitler the go-ahead. And on September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. 2 days later, both England and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. And it's not like Poland didn't try to defend itself, but when you're going out there marching with horses and muskets against German panzer tanks and machine guns, they stood a chance. And that concludes 23.2, guys. If you found this section fascinating, make sure to do on page 357 the section 23.2 review, evens only. So again, guys, if you didn't do the quiz at the beginning, I'd still like you to take the quiz. It's not a very long one, just for review's sake. All right, guys, hope you have a good Tuesday.